Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, October 1st, 2013, the U.S. government entered a shutdown that would last 16 days. Congress was unable to pass a budget for the next year, nor were they able to pass a continuing resolution for interim funds, so things came to a halt. This was the third longest shutdown in American history. About 800,000 federal employees were furloughed. Another 1.3 million were required to work without pay. And it was one of those moments where we've all faced it. You have that eternal question, wait a minute, am I an essential employee? What do I do here? But anyway, leading up to that moment, there was a huge political fight as well. We had the Tea Party insurgents among the Republicans, fights over Obamacare, the 21-hour floor speech from Ted Cruz. So let's talk about why government shut down, what the shutdown was really about. And I don't know, I feel like maybe we're suffering from government shutdown fatigue. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. Nicole Hemmer of Columbia is here as always. Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Jody.
And back with us for one more episode is Steve Kornacki of NBC and MSNBC and author of The Red and the Blue. Steve, thank you for doing this.
Glad to be here.
So we had Republicans controlling the House, Democrats controlling the Senate. Obviously, Obama's president. I kind of asked it in the intro, but Steve, what was this really about? Was this a budget fight or was this something else?
Yeah, this was the signature issue of that era of American politics. That era, I'm talking about at least in the past, but I guess
years ago.
In some ways it is. I mean, in this day and age, 7 minutes is a different era. Yeah. But the centerpiece issue was Obamacare, and it was the backlash to Obamacare that had really powered the Tea Party. I mean, there was a lot to the Tea Party, but it was the backlash to Obamacare, I would say. That really drove it and kept it alive. It was what really drove the Republican wave of 2010 when they picked up 63 House seats, got control of the House. For the Republican Party, just a remarkable transformation because less than 2 years earlier, George W. Bush, the Republican president, left office with an approval rating under 30%. The Republican Party was identified with Bush, with the Iraq War, with Dick Cheney, who was even less popular than Bush. It looked like a politically poisonous brand. And there, less than 2 years later, is John Boehner becoming Speaker of the House on the strength of a 63-seat gain. They were not able, as you say, in 2010 to get the Senate. They made big gains, but they weren't able to get Senate control. And then that energy in the sort of Republican grassroots persisted, did not succeed in getting Barack Obama out in 2012. He gets reelected, but another crop in 2012 of sort of Tea Party types get elected. One of them, Ted Cruz, a Republican senator from Texas, and Ted Cruz comes instantly to the Senate with national ambitions. That you can tell right away this is somebody eyeing a presidential run in the near future. And Cruz takes it on himself to say, I am going to force the showdown that shows our voters, our Republican voters, our Tea Party voters all across the country that finally somebody is here who actually means business and actually means to deliver on this promise we made to defund Obamacare, to get rid of Obamacare, to do that thing that was promised in 2010 and that here now in the fall of 2013, nobody has been able to deliver on. And that was kind of the backdrop of it. It was Ted Cruz was going to use a budget fight and use his prerogatives as a senator, basically to challenge Republicans to stand with him, to be willing to shut the government down, and to say, hey, we're not going to budge here until Obamacare is defunded. We're going to force the Democrats to bend, essentially, to agree to defund Obamacare or the government shuts down. And that was the gambit that Cruz drew up.
Right. And so, Niki, that's the sort of budgetary showdown, is that they had attached amendments to the budget that would basically defund Obamacare, because just to make sure I have and our listeners have our timeline set, Obamacare is the law at this point, right? It passed in 2010. So they're still fighting Obamacare, but now they're just fighting a different front, I guess.
Right. I mean, I think the House voted on repealing the ACA 50 some odd times during the Obama administration. Like, it was definitely a hobby horse of sorts. But I mean, October 1st, the day that this shutdown starts, was also the day that healthcare.gov was supposed to launch. And I guess it technically launched. It didn't do a very good job of launching. And it's this slowly unfolding crisis in the Obama administration that's sort of, it's a bit of a steady drumbeat during the shutdown. But as soon as the shutdown is over, it's like, oh, we saved the ACA. Nobody can sign up for it.
Right.
So it was still a big moment for the ACA because it was getting implemented in 2013.
Am I remembering correctly that there was some real galaxy brain thinking that the shutdown was actually good because it obscured the poor ACA rollout or whatever? I mean, I don't think anyone in the Obama administration was happy that their website was not working, right? Regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah, no one in the Obama administration thinks fondly of October 2013.
Right.
But yes, galaxy brain thinking was quite the thing even in 2013.
Yeah. So we should talk about Ted Cruz's role here. Steve, you started to get at it, but I guess I'd forgotten that he had been elected the year before. And weirdly, right, this is a showdown in the House. He's a senator, so he seems to be doing this kind of egging on without actually having his hands on any actual levers here.
And I think there was, if I'm remembering this right, there was a famous meeting, a dinner meeting at Tortilla Coast, restaurant on Capitol Hill, popular with, I guess, Capitol Hill staffers, where Ted Cruz met with the House Republicans. And it was, basically, it was to kind of coordinate, to set signals straight. And, it seemed pretty clear from the beginning, I guess, that there wasn't a logical winning ending for Ted Cruz, where, Barack Obama comes on TV and says, well, that's it. I'm going to just agree to get rid of Obamacare here because the Republicans have the government shut down. But it did look from the beginning like Ted Cruz saw an opportunity there to tap into a strain of populist conservatism that was growing very disillusioned at that moment with the Republicans who'd been elected in the Tea Party wave. And that certainly included John Boehner. And this was something that dogged Boehner his entire speakership. And within, I think, 2 years of this moment in 2013, Boehner was gone. He just had enough of it. But there was this growing grassroots frustration, talk radio frustration, blog, social media frustration that, hey, we Republicans, we made 2010 happen. We brought this party back to life. And this Obamacare thing is still here. And it's just this notion of they won't fight. They won't fight hard enough. And so Ted Cruz, the political opportunity he saw coming to the Senate that year, and again, clearly looking from the minute he got there to run for president in 2016, was to become the guy who fought, and to make it look like, I would surmise here that if the end game is, well, this is not going to ultimately work, if it looks like the rest of the party folded, but Ted Cruz was willing to keep fighting, all the better.
Yeah, this fake filibuster by Ted Cruz was really just a branding opportunity for Cruz. He had no power in the Senate to do anything about this, but he was meddling in the House and annoying the hell out of John Boehner. John Boehner was having an extremely difficult time with this Tea Party caucus. It had been causing him a lot of trouble. He didn't want the government shut down. He didn't want half the things that were coming out of the House, but he was trying to hold his party together. And here comes this freshman senator sort of walking over to all of the Tea Party caucus in the House and just rabble-rousing in a pretty effective way. There's a lot of bad blood back there.
Well, in an effective way, outside of Ted Cruz gets a lot of airtime.
Well, effective in that it sort of bolsters this Tea Party caucus and keeps them nipping at John Boehner's heels. John Boehner has a memoir about to come out, and I suspect he will have lots of words about Ted Cruz in it. I'm
sure. Yeah, and there's a long history of, and maybe these are much of the roots of it, of sort of what people think about Ted Cruz and his role, kind of within the party. It is interesting, though, that, you have Harry Reid and McConnell, and both of them, though, are like, they're not backing Cruz either. Obviously, Harry Reid is not, but even I think Mitch McConnell was kind of saying, like, what is the end game here? So Ted Cruz does seem to be going it alone. We should take one more moment to just talk about this 21-hour faux filibuster, because why is it a fake filibuster? Because there wasn't actually any legislation he was holding up. He was just sort of seizing the floor. Is that kind of...
Yeah, the bill hadn't, there was nothing that had passed the House that he was actually filibustering.
So he gives a 21-hour speech. I don't know if people will remember, but during it, I mean, he does a lot of stuff. He reads a children's story. He talked about how he really likes White Castle. He compared Obamacare to Nazism. I think that's just sort of on the bingo card. It was quite the thing. And, Steve, were you at MSNBC at that point? I mean, how did you guys sort of treat this and think of this as a news event? Yeah,
no, I was here. I'd been here about a year at the time. And I remember my memory of it, I should say, was, again, there never was a moment when you thought he was going to win in a legislative sense. It was always a question from the beginning of when it would end. But again, I think Cruz was defining victory here in different terms. Victory was really what he got out of it. Victory was he got celebrity, he got political notoriety out of it. You mentioned McConnell. I think this was I believe this was when he accused McConnell of lying and made a big enemy out of Mitch McConnell. But again, the game that Cruz was playing politically to position himself for 2016 was to make people like Mitch McConnell mad at him, to have stories written saying, oh, these Republican leaders in D.C. can't stand Ted Cruz. All the easier for him to go out to Iowa or to go to New Hampshire, to go to Republican grassroots meetings and say, hey, look, they don't like me because I'm trying to make them stick to their word, the word they gave you. I think it's a moment that helps you understand a little bit. It's one of those rise of Trump moments, I think, because what Cruz was tapping into was what Trump really hit in 2015 and 2016. And that was just this really boiling over Republican, conservative, grassroots anger, not at the Democrats and Obama, that was there, but at their own party.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see that kind of boil over. And even though Cruz is freelancing in 2013, he's playing in the same space that Republicans had been playing in throughout the Obama era, which was to come up with like crazier and crazier stunts to somehow obstruct the Obama agenda, often quite successfully. But that Mitch McConnell would then, when the Republicans were in the majority in the Senate, would really run with in 2015 and 2016, just like innovating ways to both seize the narrative, but also to prevent the Obama agenda from going forward. And so he kind of moves closer to where Ted Cruz is, because I think McConnell, too, senses something's in the air.
Right. I mean, that's, I think there's sort of tactics roots here that we can see in the sort of way you play the modern media environment. But there is also just Obamacare itself as an issue that Republicans keep going back to, and Trump continues to go back to it, Steve. So, I mean, are you surprised at all Republicans are still fighting against Obamacare when if you do an actual ledger tally, they've never had an actual successful fight against it?
Yeah, I'm surprised a little bit that it carried over, to the degree it did, that it got to, even when Trump became president and he got that vote on the floor where John McCain in 2017 gave that famous thumbs down. I'm a little surprised that it got to that point. Because I think there were some off ramps for them. You could see that the politics of this really never changed, from where they were in 2013. Once it became the law of the land, I mean, it passed in 2010. From that moment on, the politics of this were going to be different because you were going to be up against the accusation that, hey, you're trying to take away protections on pre-existing conditions right now. That was what Democrats were always counting on. Once they got it through, it would be very hard to take away. And I think that was established pretty early, pretty quickly, and pretty consistently. And so, yeah, I thought by this point they would have repositioned themselves a little bit on healthcare. Although it's one of those, Trump. I feel now sometimes that when Trump brings it up, it's sometimes it's in a greatest hits kind of way.
Yeah,
where he just remembers, oh yeah, the guys loved it when if there is a second Trump term, I'm not sure. I'd be a little surprised if you got another vote like you had in 2017.
Well, I know you're being slightly facetious there, but I do think this era, right, this moment, 2010 to 20, let's call it 14 or 15, just solidified a type of politics and a playbook. And, you talked about at the very beginning, you kind of joked like, oh, this seems like a long gone era 7 years ago. But it also, I think, really also strikes me as an opening bracket for the kind of politics we have now with the media environment, Twitter. I mean, I remember this Ted Cruz floor speech was one of those things where it was a wild political moment, and then just the way that it fractured in the media, and you could just sense that like Twitter was going in one direction and cable news was going in another and talk radio was going in another. And, like that's very much still with us, and you can kind of see the roots of the explosion of that in this moment for sure.
The thing I remember too was the backdrop then, for me at least, was there'd been a big government shutdown in the 90s when it was Newt Gingrich versus Bill Clinton. And that had been the last big kind of confrontation like this to hit Washington. And that one had not worked well for the Republicans. That was over Medicare funding. And that was, that was Bill Clinton saying, I will shut down the government sooner than I sign your bill that would slow down the rate of increase of Medicare spending. And Bill Clinton politically was seen as having won that very dramatically, going from a very bad midterm in 94 to an easy re-election in 96. And the thing that was interesting to me in 2013 to 2014 was the politics of it broadly looked like they were breaking just as badly against the Republicans. And I mean, there was an urgency you would hear in news coverage, CNN news coverage of, the McConnell types, their aides, folks talking to the press, making very clear, Republican leaders see this as a dead end, want out. They're trying to, get, Cruz under control, all these sorts of things, because the polling looked really bad for them. And I think they were evoking a lot of comparisons to, the 95 and then 96. And is this we've got a midterm coming in 2014. Usually they're bad for Democrats. Is this going to give Democrats new life? And it's the 2013 shutdown. What I remember politically, and I've tried to keep in mind, is that 2014, despite the shutdown, the Ted Cruz shutdown, looking like a political disaster for Republicans, 2014 midterms were anything but a disaster for Republicans. It was like there'd never been a shutdown in terms of the results that year.
Yeah, and I think that the calculus difference between the two of those is really interesting because Newt Gingrich in a lot of ways was playing to the broad American electorate, trying to get them on his side. And in the case of 2013, Ted Cruz and the Tea Party caucus were playing to the base, and that ended up being a winning strategy for them. And that sort of knowledge of if we can get our base excited, we can continue to have a hold on power has been kind of defining feature of Republican politics in this era.
So one last thing, I mentioned it in the intro, but I am curious what role shutdowns play in the public imagination, if they play any role whatsoever. But, that 95, 96 one, I mean, I was young, I was growing up, but I was in DC, and so maybe I just felt it more because it was like, oh, this city is now very quiet. But, it felt like a big, big, big deal in the way that you were describing, Steve. And then 13 felt like a sideshow. And then I bet you listeners can't even remember how many shutdowns there have been since then. There was one in January 2018, and there was one in January 2019. And so tell me if you disagree with my premise, but, it kind of feels like maybe The Boy Who Cried Shutdown or something. Like there's a little bit of fatigue here around it, and they don't feel like these seismic events as much anymore. Yeah,
I feel like the term shutdown has two distinct meanings in our politics. One is the literal shutdown where the government doesn't have the money to pay for employees to staff and has to shut down and furloughs and all this. And then there's the shutdown as a media event. And I think that's where 1995 was the biggest shutdown. And there were actually even a series of shutdowns in 95, but only one was a major media event shutdown. It was November of 1995. And it was, again, there was, at that point, there was one cable news channel. It was CNN. There was no Fox, no MSNBC. There was still big, NBC, CBS, ABC, big network news coverage. People still read their local newspapers. There was a more limited source of news. And to all of these news outlets, this was, I think your memory certainly matches up with mine. This was a huge deal. And it was like, turn on the news at 6:30 and it's just shots of silent federal buildings and national parks and all of this. And you felt, I was in, small town in Massachusetts. I was far away from the federal government, but I felt like something momentous was happening in the world. But again, it was purely because of the media coverage I was absorbing. And I I certainly, even the second shutdown in 1996 or 95, I think it was January 96, they had another one, much more. I think the media was sort of like, we've done this before. And I think, I think they're not treated as those major, with the same gravity as that one was.
Right, because in 1995, it's still, I think you're exactly right, it has this kind of novelty to it, because it's not until 1980 when the Comptroller General of the United States sort of reinterprets this 19th century act and says, no, if you don't have a budget agreement, you have to shut down the government and send everyone home. You can't just run on fumes here. And so when it actually happens in 1995 for an extended period of time, it's shocking. It's new. Jody, as you were saying, like now we've gotten to like how many shutdowns at this point? Like it's not a media event because it's not novel in the same way that it was in the 90s.
There's one other element here, which I don't even know if I believe myself, but what's the point of having a podcast if you can't float things like this? But, I do think like shutdowns, sequestration, debt ceiling fights, like I think that maybe the feeling that these aren't as seismic events anymore as maybe they were even just 5-10 years ago, maybe has something to do with the fact that like the government budgets and like debt and all these things are less salient issues now. I feel like, one of the lessons the last 4 years is that we've kind of gotten over, for better or worse, caring about debt and fiscal responsibility. And so maybe it's just that a big budget showdown doesn't feel like it means something to us or whatever. I don't know.
I believe the deficit hawks come back the next time there is a Democratic president.
Day after election, yes.
That's
yes. Right. Day after inauguration, yes. That might.
They're a seasonal bird.
There you go. That's a good line. All right, Steve, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I just quickly, I think you make a good point there, and I think they were what we might have substituted for the shock value of debt ceiling, brinkmanship, and government shutdowns, and all of that is Trumpism.
Yeah.
We've got a president who says and tweets things that we could never have imagined the president saying or tweeting, and setting off these debates and discussions in just areas never went before. And then suddenly, the deficit went up. I mean, I feel it kind of has that effect too.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. Steve Kornacki of NBC and MSNBC, and the excellent book, The Red and the Blue. Thank you so much for doing this. This is really fun.
Thanks for having me.
And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Brittany Brown is our other producer. Follow us on social media. We're posting a bunch of stuff on Twitter and Instagram every day at ThisDayPod. Keep sending us emails, thisdaypod@gmail.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
This law is a train wreck. Now, if you will forgive me, I want to take the opportunity to read 2 bedtime stories to my girls, but there's a point to this also. And the point is very simple. The urgency we have and should feel is because of our kids. Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham. Would you like them here or there? I would not like them here or there. I would not like them anywhere. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them.
Radiotopia.